2008 was a pretty busy year for me. Between running a Text Plus fan club of The Fray, lying to strangers on congregate chat rooms, and making my mom drive me and my girlfriend on my first date to see Wall-E so I could cry on the car ride home, I was a pretty busy guy. I really got into video games that year. That was around the time that we got an Xbox 360, and I didn't really have time for books or school or not Halo 3. My grades were slipping. I quit the Quick Recall team, mostly because all I did anyways was watch Robot Chicken clips on my friend Chris's phone, and I think by the end of it, my parents were pretty worried about my academic career. But joke's on them, cause I got a theater degree. So one day, around the winter time, my dad calls me upstairs. So I pause Tac 2, probably bound up the stairs like an animal and say, "Yes, Papa?" He says, "Ross, I'm tired of watching you murder beggars and steal their shoes in Elder Scrolls. Learn how to read." And he hands me a book, Hatchet, by Gary Paulsen. I tried to destroy it, but my 5th grade arms were just too weak. So I said, I guess I will read a book for the first time in my life. And it was not bad. Hatchet is... I don't have the notes on Hatchet. I swear I've read it. Oh boy. Hatchet is a Newbery Honor recipient young adult fiction novel written by Gary Paulsen in 1986. It revolves around Brian Robeson, a 13-year-old boy who's on his way flying over the Canadian wilderness to visit his dad. Unfortunately, the pilot has a heart attack and Brian is forced to crash land the plane. He lands in a lake and seeks shelter. After he's fully recovered, Brian realizes that he has to survive in the wilderness. And he does. Even though he's just 13 and he has no experience in the wilderness, he survives for 54 days with nothing but the meager possessions that he had on him and a hatchet that his mother gave him before he left. Hatchet ends when a tornado decimates his shelter, but also causes the tail end of the bush plane that he crashed in to rise up to the surface. He realizes that there could be a survival kit in the plane, so he builds a raft, swims out to it, and retrieves it. He finds a radio transmitter that he accidentally turns on and attracts the attention of a nearby pilot who comes and saves him. The sequels weren't all great. One of them was about the military hiring Brian to go back to the wilderness so they could study his survival techniques. One of them was about Brian just being awkward and not fitting in school because he's got PTSD. Towards the end of the series, it takes a weird turn. Brian ends up just living in the wilderness because he can't stand people anymore. He makes a girlfriend who's a local trapper, and her parents get mauled and killed by a bear. So Brian makes friends with a nearby dog that also got mauled by a bear, and he finds the bear and hunts it and kills it. It's pretty good. Now, there was also a movie that was released in 1990 called A Cry in the Wild. Cry in the Wild? Yeah, I think that's what it's called. It's not the best.
The Los Angeles Times called it splendid.
Keep away from my berries, pal.
It's pretty good. Regardless, Hatchet was a banger, and it completely changed my child brain. But for all this additional media, there is one outlet that I think Hatchet would fit incredibly well into, and that's the survival video game genre. So today we're going to try to figure out how we could adapt Hatchet to be a video game. One cool and pretty obvious avenue to approach it from would be to create a survival game based on the skills that Brian actually had to learn. He had to learn how to craft his own tools and evade predators. The game would focus on requiring the player to actually learn survival skills and figure out how to conquer puzzles in the game. The only problem with this is that people who have read the book or can find the book online could easily find the answers to the plot points and discover what Brian did to figure out these problems. A way that I think this could be solved would be to create a game with multiple survival vignettes based on characters that have nothing to do with Hatchet, each surviving in their own setting, like a desert and a jungle, or a mountain, or an island, or the plains, or anything. The vignettes could even be based on real survival stories, like Jose Salvador Alvarenga, a man who survived in a tiny boat stranded in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or the man that the movie James Franco. The difficulty in this game I think could be pretty interesting. A lot of it would be focused on trial and error, such as when Brian eats too many berries because he's very hungry and doesn't realize until later that it was poisonous to eat that many. The way that the player got better at the game wouldn't be through any kind of skill tree or experience points. It would be based completely on the sharpening of their survival instincts and knowledge of the world. One game I would compare this system of difficulty to is Celeste. In Celeste, you don't upgrade your character. You simply play the game, and through trial and error, encounter, you become so good at it that the next time you play it, you're way faster. A game that I would contrast this system with would be Far Cry. While Far Cry is similar in that it is a survival game, it's also different because the stakes are just too low. In Hatchet, you wouldn't be able to simply run in somewhere with a gun and find a bear and kill it and use its pelt to make a pistol holster. You would actually have to think very carefully about any time you hunt a wild animal or even go out to forage. The vignettes would likely only last a few hours apiece, maybe 6 to 9 hours of gameplay, but there could be as many of them as the developers wanted to make. Brian is lost for a total of 54 days, and the book is organized in time jumps. After Brian makes some kind of momentous accomplishment or suffers tragically, we see a small time jump of a few days or weeks, and Brian is changed by the end of it. The game could be organized similarly. If you accomplish something great, or discover how to use a new tool, or discover information that allows you to find civilization more quickly, you could experience some type of time jump. These time jumps could also function as save points. When you die, you could go all the way back to the beginning of a time jump, so you'd be constantly focused on trying to find that tool or find that path that gets you a time jump. The time jumps could also represent different opportunities in the player's time in the wilderness to find a way back home. Say for example, there's a passing bush plane that could find you and save you if you know how to make a signal fire. If you haven't learned the skills to make a signal fire, you could miss that chance to be saved, and that time jump could pass you by. Later on, you might be able to find a backpack with a radio transmitter in it, but if you don't know where to look for it, or don't have the skill set to maybe light your way through a cave that has the backpack at the end of it, you won't be able to use that radio transmitter either. One outcome of the vignettes could just be you never making it out of the wilderness. It could show a cutscene of your character living a pretty long life and eventually succumbing to the elements. This would turn the game into an interesting sort of choose-your-own-adventure story where your decisions and your skills influence the end of it. Think about the game Until Dawn. In Until Dawn, you have a lot of chances to change your behavior and get to know people better and make different choices, and the end of the game can change drastically depending on what you do. I think the open world feature of this game could be very interesting. Think about the beginning of No Man's Sky. You're crash landed on a planet with a ship, but without the resources that you need to get off the planet. What you have to do is collect resources and learn and get better at the game, and eventually you can get off the planet. And after that, you can eventually get to other star systems and find black holes, and you travel further and further out into this huge world that you're only just realizing how big it really is. Brian has a similar experience. When he first wakes back up after crashing, he can't go very far. He has to always be able to find his way back to his cave where he keeps his gear. But eventually, he learns how to make maps, he learns how to make tools, he learns how to hunt and forage for himself. And finally, Brian can venture out and go further and get resources and bring them back to his camp. The player would be able to do this, so the open world would start out feeling very constrained, but that's only because the player's skill would be constrained. Eventually, you'd be able to explore more of the beautiful wilderness and see more of the danger, but be able to handle it better. Sound and music would be very important features of this game, because Brian has to be able to listen to the wilderness and identify animals that are nearby, or incoming weather systems, or listen for a passing plane. Brian focuses very heavily on his hearing, and I think the player would also have to do these same things. Because of this, music in the game would feel very sparse and infrequent, but it could also be quite beautiful. The music in Zelda Breath of the Wild is extremely sparse and beautiful. The piano melodies are gorgeous, but they also don't intrude on the sound of the game very much. You get the same beautiful sound effects of nature and things that you need to hear, and you also get good music. I think orchestral cinematic music could be used in the cutscenes, but also sparingly, because the focus is really going to be on the sound of the wild and hearing what you need to hear. Injury and illness would play a massive role on the gameplay. Because Brian has nobody to rely on him but himself, when he gets injured or when he gets ill, he almost dies from it every time. In one scene, he's attacked by a moose and he is completely feeble afterwards because of course there's no health care for him. He also doesn't have anybody to rely on to take care of him or find him food. He's forced to rely on the food that he has fortunately stockpiled for himself. When Brian gets sick from all the berries that he eats instinctively, he's pretty much unable to take care of himself afterward. A feature could be added that is similar to the malaria feature in Far Cry 2 or the Haran virus in Dying Light. You can have illness play a role by forcing the character to find the right ingredients to make a medicine for themselves, or else the gameplay will be made more difficult. If the character gets into a situation where they're injured, medicine would become the skill set that they would need to unlock and learn just because they got injured. It's possible that you can never be injured in the game and never have to learn those skills, but because you get injured, you do. And of course, other systems would play a very big role. Things like map making and cooking and crafting would take the front seat, and honestly, weapons and combat would definitely take a back seat. I think you'd still be able to craft your own weapons, but it would be done mostly because your weapons were made too poorly, or because you lost them in a wild chase with an animal or something. Between the multiple vignette survival scenarios and the expanding wilderness of the open world, I think this game would fit in pretty well among the genre of survival games. If you like videos like this, please subscribe and let me know what you think of the concept. And also tell me if there's other books that you would like to see adapted to video games. And that's all I got. Until next time, I guess read a book. It is 9:50.